I never thought a random Tuesday night at that dingy bar on Fifth Street would turn into one of those nights you remember forever. You know, the kind where you drink way too much, and suddenly everything you're usually careful about just spills out of your mouth like you're a busted dam. Yeah, that night. It started with me just trying to kill time before heading home, not expecting to meet anyone, let alone the one guy who'd make me rethink every stupid thing I thought I knew about myself. So, there I was, nursing a whiskey sour, sitting alone at the counter because the place was packed, and honestly, I just didn't feel like dealing with anyone. That's when he slid onto the stool next to me like he owned the place, a tall guy with this kind of unruly dark hair and the most disarmingly easy smile. He ordered a beer and then looked over at me, probably noticing how I was half eyeing my phone and half pretending to be interested in the game on TV. "Rough day?" he asked, and I figured, why not answer? Sometimes, strangers are the best people to unload on, since they won't judge or bring it up again. His name was Ezra, and something about the way he said it made it feel like an invitation, not just a name, more like a key. We ended up talking for hours, though I barely remember the exact thread of conversation, because the drinks definitely hit harder than I thought they would. We laughed over dumb things, like our mutual hatred for kale smoothies and the fact that neither of us could cook to save our lives. But then, it shifted. Ezra started telling me about his messy breakup last year, how he had moved cities to escape it, and I found myself opening up about my own disasters in love, the ones I usually keep locked tight. The bar was closing before I even realized it, and we were the last ones there, leaning in close like we'd known each other forever. We drank too much and told each other everything, like the kind of everything that you only trust a stranger with after a couple shots of courage. By the time I walked out into the cold night air, my head was spinning, and my heart felt weirdly full and empty all at once. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see him again or if I was just caught up in the moment, but something told me this wasn't just going to be a one-time thing. And honestly, I was terrified and kind of excited to find out. I ended up standing outside the bar for a while, just staring at the neon sign flickering above the door, wondering if I should have asked him for his number or just walked away like nothing happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket right then, and I pulled it out to see a message from him. "Made it home okay? Hope you're not too hungover tomorrow." I smiled, which felt weird because I don't usually smile at texts from guys I just met. I typed back, "Surprisingly intact. You?" And he replied almost immediately, "Barely. Might need a day to recover." That simple back and forth kept me awake longer than I expected. I kept rereading his messages like they were some sort of clue to what would happen next. The next morning hit me like a freight train. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, my head pounding and mouth dry enough to start a fire, I realized I hadn't even asked Ezra what he did for a living. I remembered he mentioned moving cities and a breakup, but nothing concrete about his life. That felt like my chance, to reach out again, but in a less drunken, more normal human way. I texted him, "What do you actually do when you're not being a professional heartbreaker?" It was dumb, but I was trying to be casual. His reply was almost instant. "Haha, I wish. I'm a graphic designer." "You?" That kicked off this weird, effortless conversation over the next few days. We found ourselves sharing pieces of our lives we usually kept tucked away. He told me about how he worked freelance, which sometimes meant late nights and zero social life, but he loved the creative freedom. I shared how my job as a copywriter wasn't glamorous, but paid the bills, and gave me enough downtime to binge-watch terrible shows guilt-free. By the end of the week, we'd agreed to meet up again, this time for coffee, which felt like a safer setting to test if that wild night was just luck or something real. When I saw him sitting at the corner table, dressed casually in a faded band tee that made him look effortlessly cool, I felt this flutter in my chest I hadn't expected. We talked about everything, from the ridiculous to the serious. He was passionate about art and showed me pictures of his latest projects on his phone. I told him about my terrible attempts at cooking and how my mom always said I'd burn water if I tried. We laughed a lot, and more than once he caught me looking at him like he was the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. At some point, the conversation turned quiet, comfortable, like we'd fallen into this easy rhythm that only happens when you're genuinely interested in someone else. Then he said something that stuck with me. "You know, I wasn't sure I'd meet anyone here," he said, nodding toward the small cafe around us, "but I'm really glad I did." It was simple, but in that moment, it felt like the kind of thing people only say when it actually means something. I didn't know where this was going, but I wanted to find out. I wanted to know more about him, about us. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing each other. Sometimes for drinks, sometimes for those sad little dinners I tried to cook, which mostly ended in us ordering takeout. We were both still figuring things out, tentative because we'd been hurt before, but there was this honesty between us that made it feel different. One night, about a month after we met, we decided to have a quiet night in. I remember it was raining, the kind where you can't hear anything else but the steady patter against the windows. We were sitting on my couch, sharing a bottle of wine, and the conversation turned to our families. Ezra told me about his sister, who'd always been his anchor through everything, and how his parents still didn't really get that he was gay even though he'd been out for years. I shared how my family was loud and messy but loving, and how I'd always felt more comfortable hiding parts of myself around them. Even now, we drank more than we probably should have, and I could feel that old dam starting to crack again. I told him about the last breakup I'd had, how it ended with a lot of silence and things left unsaid that still haunted me. He listened without interrupting, just this quiet presence beside me that made it easier to be vulnerable. Then he reached out and took my hand. It was the kind of touch that makes your skin tingle and your heart race, but also feels like coming home. "We don't have to be afraid to tell each other everything," he said softly. "Not if we don't want to." I looked at him, really looked, and saw all the messy parts he'd let me in on. The fears, the scars, the hope. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real, more real than anything I'd experienced in a long time. That night, we didn't just drink too much and talk. We started building something. Something that felt like maybe, just maybe, it could last. But of course, nothing worth having ever comes easy, right? Because just when I thought I was starting to figure it out, life threw us a curveball I never saw coming. And that's when everything really got complicated. I wish I could say things just kept getting easier after that night. But life doesn't exactly work that way. A week after Ezra and I had that conversation on my couch, the one where we promised not to be afraid to tell each other everything, the first real test showed up like a wrecking ball. It started with a message, not the kind you expect from someone you're just getting to know, but from someone who used to mean everything to Ezra, his ex. She sent a casual, "Hey, we need to talk," that made my stomach twist into knots the moment I saw it. I'd heard Ezra mention her a few times, mostly in passing, but the way his face tightened when he did made it clear the chapter wasn't completely closed. I tried not to think about it, but you know how that goes. Once your mind starts spinning, it's hard to stop. I wondered if I was just a rebound, or if she was trying to pull him back in. The next time we met, I couldn't keep it to myself. I asked him gently, trying to sound casual. "So, the ex, does she want to get back together or something?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair like he was wrestling with a storm inside. "No, it's not like that. She's been going through some stuff, and I guess she thought I could help her figure things out. I haven't seen her in months, but this message, it's dragging up a lot." I nodded, doing my best to keep the jealousy out of my voice. But inside, I was scrambling to keep my footing. If we were going to be everything to each other like we promised, then I had to deal with this, no matter how much it hurt. The following days were a weird mix of waiting and watching. Ezra was withdrawn, quieter than usual, and it hit me that he was trying to sort through his past on his own before bringing me into it. One night, he finally opened up. "She was part of my life for a long time," he said, voice rough. "We broke up because we just stopped being good for each other." But it's hard, you know, when someone who used to be your whole world suddenly becomes a stranger. I reached out and grabbed his hand, squeezing it. "I get that. I've been there too, but I'm here now." That felt like a turning point. We started talking more honestly about what we needed from each other. Space, patience, trust. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments when I felt like backing off because the whole thing scared me. But every time I looked at him, all messy past included, I still wanted to try. Then, one Friday evening, Ezra invited me over to his apartment. He'd cooked dinner, not one of his usual takeout nights, and it was surprisingly good. We sat at the tiny kitchen table, laughter bubbling between bites as we shared stories from our week. I was starting to feel like this was really happening, that maybe this could be something solid. After dinner, we moved to the couch, sitting close enough that our knees touched. For a while, we just watched a dumb movie neither of us really cared about. Then Ezra turned toward me, eyes searching. "I want you to meet someone," he said. My heart did that weird stutter thing. "Who?" "My sister. She's visiting this weekend. I think you'd like her." It was a big deal. Meeting family wasn't something either of us had rushed into with anyone before. His sister was obviously important to him, and suddenly, that added a new layer to what we were doing. I tried to play it cool, but honestly, I was nervous. When Saturday came, I showed up at his place with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of wildflowers, something I'd heard Ezra say his sister liked. She walked in a few minutes later, a striking woman with a warm smile and an energy that filled the room. They hugged like they hadn't seen each other in forever, and I felt like the awkward third wheel, but she made me feel welcome right away. We spent the afternoon talking, sharing stories, and somehow, the three of us ended up laughing about the weirdest things. Ezra's sister had this way of cutting through the tension and making everything feel lighter. Watching them together, I could see so much of him in her, the same stubbornness, the same fiercely loyal heart. Later, when it was just Ezra and me again, I could tell he was relieved. "Thanks for being open to meeting her," he said softly. I shrugged, trying to hide how much it meant to me. "She seems great. You have no idea how much I want this to work." He smiled, his eyes shining in that way that still caught me off guard. Me too. That night, as we lay tangled together, I felt like a million pieces of my life were finally starting to fit somewhere. But of course, just when you think everything's settling, life reminds you that it loves a good plot twist. A few days later, Ezra got a call that changed everything. His ex, who'd sent that first text, was moving back to town. She wanted to meet, to talk about what had been left unsaid. He told me about it over the phone, voice thick with frustration and uncertainty. I don't know what to do. I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to lose what we have either. I wanted to tell him everything would be fine, that I trusted him. But the truth was, I had no idea. All I knew was that whatever happened next would test us in ways neither of us expected. And that's when I realized that sometimes the most honest conversations are the hardest ones to have. And that maybe love isn't just about telling each other everything, but about deciding what you do with it afterward. The day he told me his ex was moving back was like someone hit the pause button on my brain. I remember sitting on my couch, staring at my phone, holding it so tight my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to say, "Okay, I get it. I'm out," and walk away before things got messy. But another part, maybe the stupid, stubborn part, refused to believe it had to end before it even really started. That night, Ezra showed up at my place unannounced. He looked exhausted, like he'd spent the day carrying a mountain on his shoulders. We didn't say much at first, just sat side by side. The silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, he turned to me. "I'm meeting her tomorrow," he said quietly. "I want you to know that." I swallowed hard and forced my voice steady. "Do you want me to come?" He shook his head. "No, this is something I need to do alone. But I want to be honest with you about it. That honesty meant something, even if it stung." I understood that this meeting wasn't about rekindling something with her. It was about closure, about making peace with the past. But that didn't stop the fear from creeping in. The fear that he'd realized some part of him still belonged there, and not with me. The next day dragged by in this weird blur. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a text or call. Something to let me know how it went. When it came, it was just a short message. It was complicated, but it's done. I wanted to ask a million questions, but I knew better. I waited until Ezra came over that evening, and when he did, I could tell by the way he carried himself that something had shifted. He looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted, but the scars were still raw. We settled onto the couch, and this time, I reached for his hand first. The small gesture seemed to say what words couldn't. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. She wanted answers I didn't have. Some things I thought I'd forgotten came back in full force, but I told her, "I'm with you now, and that means something real to me." Hearing that made my chest ache in all the right ways, but I also knew there was more beneath the surface. "It's okay to be scared," I said softly. He looked at me then, eyes searching mine like he was trying to see if I meant it. "I am. Terrified, actually, but I don't want to mess this up." We spent the rest of the night talking, really talking, about fears, hopes, and everything in between. For the first time, I felt like we were building something on solid ground, even though the ground beneath us had been shaky for so long. The weeks that followed weren't perfect. There were moments when doubt crept in, when past ghosts whispered in the dark. But every time, we chose to face it together. Ezra introduced me to more of his world, his favorite little coffee shops, the park where he went to clear his head, the art gallery he dreamed of working with someday. I shared my own corners of life, the messy parts and the neat ones. One lazy Sunday, we found ourselves sprawled on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by paint tubes and sketchbooks. He was working on a new piece, and I watched him, fascinated by the concentration on his face. "You know," I said, breaking the quiet, "I'm really glad we drank too much that night." He laughed, a soft sound that made the room feel warmer. "Me too. Could have been just another wasted evening, but instead, it was the start of something." I reached out, pulling him closer. "Something real." He smiled, and in that moment, everything felt right. The past was there, sure, but it didn't define us. What mattered was what we were building now. Two people who chose each other despite the messiness. Love, I realized, isn't about having no doubts or perfect timing. It's about showing up, over and over, with an open heart and a willingness to be vulnerable. And with Ezra, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Things between Ezra and me felt like they were finally settling into something steady, the kind of thing I'd never thought I'd get to have. But, as life likes to remind me, even steady rivers have rocks beneath the surface. It started with a phone call one Friday afternoon. I was at work, halfway through a meeting that felt like it was going to last forever, when my phone buzzed with a message from Ezra. "Can we talk tonight?" "It's important." That simple line sent my chest into a weird mix of excitement and dread. Important talks almost never meant good news. When I got to his place later, Ezra was sitting on the couch, looking tense, fingers twitching around the rim of his mug. It was the kind of nervous energy that made me want to pull him into a hug and tell him everything be okay. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He inhaled slowly, then let it out like he was pushing through some invisible barrier. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something I didn't know how to say before, and I guess I was scared it'd change everything." My heart beat faster, but I stayed quiet. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is just be there. I got a job offer," he said, "in another city, San Francisco." San Francisco, of all places. I'd never expected that. He stared at me, waiting for a reaction. I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside, it was like the floor shifted beneath me. "That's big," I managed. "Are you thinking of taking it?" He nodded. "Yeah, it's a huge opportunity. But it means moving, starting over again." We sat there for a moment, the weight of those words settling between us. I knew this was a crossroads, the kind where you had to decide if what you had was worth fighting for across the miles, or if it was better to let go before distance chipped away at everything. "Have you thought about us?" I asked quietly. He took my hand, squeezing it like he needed to hold on. "Every day. I don't want to lose this. Us." I felt tears prick my eyes, the vulnerability of the moment hitting me like a wave, but I swallowed them down because I needed to be strong for both of us. "We can make it work," I said, more to convince myself than him. "Long distance isn't easy, but maybe it's worth it." He smiled, a little shaky, but real. "Yeah, worth it." That night, we talked for hours about the future, about how often we'd call, visit, how we'd keep each other close, even when separated by miles. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was honest. For the first time, the everything we'd always promised each other felt like it had a roadmap, even if the path was uncertain. A few weeks later, Ezra started packing up his apartment. The energy shifted from hopeful to bittersweet. We made plans for a trip together before he left. Just 2 days to soak up as much as we could. Our last weekend before the move was filled with small moments that suddenly felt huge. We wandered through the city streets, holding hands like we were scared someone might snatch the moment away. We shared late-night coffee and lazy mornings, and on the last night, we sat on the roof of his building, the city lights sparkling below us. "I'm really going to miss this," I said, leaning into him. "Me too," he replied, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. There was a silence that wasn't sad, just full of everything we'd shared. When the day came for him to leave, I drove him to the airport. The goodbye was awkward and packed with all the things we didn't know how to say. Standing there watching him walk away, I felt like I was holding my breath. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster. Late-night calls that stretched into the early morning, texts that made my heart race, and video chats where I could finally see his face again. But there were also the hard moments, the missed calls, the exhaustion from time difference, the ache of not having him there. One night, about a month in, I found myself scrolling through old texts, the memories hitting me harder than I expected. I texted him, "Missing you tonight." Almost instantly, his reply came, "Counting down the days till I'm back." That's when I realized something. Distance wasn't just physical. It was emotional too, and it needed work, more than I'd thought. Over time, we learned to navigate that space, finding ways to keep our connection alive. We sent little care packages. Him, a sketch he'd made. Me, a playlist of songs that reminded me of him. We made plans for visits, weekends that became lifelines. One video call, he surprised me by showing his latest art project, a mural he was painting in a community center. Seeing him so passionate, so alive, made me fall for him all over again. "Wish I could be there to see it in person," I said. "Soon," he promised. There were moments of doubt, sure. The kind where you question if it's all worth it. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered that night at the bar, when two strangers drank too much and told each other everything. That reckless honesty had turned into something real, and I wasn't ready to let it go. Because sometimes, love doesn't come easy or neat. Sometimes it's messy, complicated, stretched across cities and time zones. But when it's right, it's also the thing that makes all the hard parts worth it. And with Ezra, I was ready to fight for every messy, beautiful second. The months that followed felt like a delicate dance between two worlds. San Francisco and my city weren't just miles apart geographically. They were different lives we were trying to blend through screens and sporadic visits. Every time Ezra and I hung up after a video call, I'd find myself staring at the empty space where he used to be in my apartment. The silence reminding me just how much I missed him. We'd promised each other honesty, and for the most part we kept to that. But there were moments, the tiny, quiet ones, when I could tell he was holding something back, like a secret tucked away behind his eyes. Maybe it was the stress of starting over, the pressure of a new job, or maybe it was the invisible distance growing between us. I didn't want to pry too much, scared that he might pull away if I got too close. One Friday night, after a long week of missed calls and half-hearted texts, I got a message from Ezra that just said, "Can we talk?" Real talk. My heart hit my stomach. I called him immediately, and when he picked up, his voice was quieter than usual. I don't know how to say this. He started, pausing like his words were caught in a storm. "I'm struggling, with work, with everything. I feel like I'm losing myself here." I took a breath, trying to steady the lump in my throat. "I didn't know it was this bad." He sighed, the sound heavy. "I didn't want to worry you, but I miss you, and I hate feeling like I'm drowning. Like I'm holding on, but maybe I'm not strong enough." Hearing him like that, raw and vulnerable, made something inside me break and rebuild at the same time. "You're not alone, okay? We're in this together." We talked for hours that night, peeling back layers of fear and frustration. He told me about the late nights at the studio, the imposter syndrome that hit him hard, and the loneliness that crept up even in a city full of people. I shared my own struggles, how work had been overwhelming, how quiet my apartment felt without him there. It was one of those conversations that leaves you raw but somehow more connected. When we finally hung up, I felt closer to him than I had in weeks. The following weekend, when he came to visit, I could see the weight on his shoulders still there, but a little lighter. We spent those days cocooned in our little bubble, cooking together, wandering the city streets at dusk, talking about dreams and fears we'd both been too scared to say out loud. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sun dip below the skyline, Ezra turned to me with that shaky smile he sometimes got when he was about to say something serious. "I don't want to run away," he said quietly. "Not from the city, not from us, but I do need to figure out how to be okay in both places." I took his hand, pressing it against my chest so he could feel my heartbeat. "We'll figure it out. One step at a time." That night, lying in bed with his head on my shoulder, I realized that love isn't about having all the answers. It's about sticking around when things get messy, when the distance and doubts threaten to pull you apart. The real test wasn't just surviving the miles between us, but choosing each other every day despite them. And I was ready to choose Ezra, no matter how complicated it got. A few weeks later, we sat down for a long video call, a ritual that had become our lifeline. This time, instead of work talk or casual catch-ups, we planned something different. "I want to come back," he said, "not just for a visit, but for good. I've realized that the job, the city, it's not everything. What matters is here, with you." My heart nearly stopped. "Are you sure?" He smiled, a little nervous but steady. "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time." That night, as we mapped out the possibilities, I felt something shift. The messy, uncertain journey we'd been on was leading us somewhere real, a place where we could build a life together without screens between us. Because sometimes, love means doing the hard stuff, saying the hard things, taking the leaps that scare you. And when you find someone willing to do that with you, well, that's everything. When Ezra finally moved back, it felt like the weight I'd been carrying for months started to lift. Slow and steady. I remember the day he showed up at my apartment, a battered suitcase in hand, and that same easy smile I'd fallen for. The distance hadn't erased the way my heart flipped when he walked through the door, and I think the relief in his eyes mirrored my own. We didn't rush into anything. There was no grand declaration or cinematic moment. Just two people quietly figuring out how to share a space again, learning each other's rhythms like it was the first time all over. Some nights we'd cook terrible meals together, laughing at the messes we made. Others, we'd sit on the couch, tangled up in blankets, talking about everything and nothing. What struck me most was how natural it felt to have him close again. The late-night talks that once stretched across time zones now happened in the same room. The small gestures, his hand finding mine as we walked down the street, his head resting against my shoulder while we watched a movie, they became the quiet proof that this was real. One evening, after a lazy Sunday brunch, we wandered to that old bar on 5th Street where it all began. It hadn't changed much, the same worn wood, the familiar hum of chatter, but everything felt different. Sitting side by side at the counter, Ezra reached over and squeezed my hand. "Remember this place?" he asked, smiling. I nodded. How could I forget? "The night we drank too much and told each other everything," he laughed softly. "I'm glad we did." "Me too." That night, as we walked home under the city lights, I realized that love isn't always about fireworks or perfect moments. Sometimes, it's about showing up, day after day, for the messy, unpredictable journey that two people build together. It's about trust, patience, and the courage to keep opening up, even when it's hard. With Ezra, I found that kind of love, a real, steady kind that feels like home. And honestly, I couldn't have asked for anything more.